The Trump administration is expected to name former Trump transition team official Anthony Scaramucci, well known as the Mooch, as White House communications director. 4 sources in and around the White House tell NBC News. Axios' Jonathan Swan was the first to report Scaramucci's ascension, but was careful to give this caveat: nothing is ever settled until President Trump announces it. It's a controversial choice, and Axios reports that Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon are very much against the selection. Source tells NBC's Katie Tur that Scaramucci met with Ivanka Trump and the president himself in the Oval Office for at least an hour yesterday, where he was offered the job. Sean Spicer, the press secretary, has been pulling double duty as press secretary and comms director since May, when Mike Dubke resigned, just 3 months into the job. Nicole Wallace, I'm going to do one of my favorite things right now to you, which is to make you do like a flashback to your former life before you were a journalist, host, superstar, back when you were White House communications director. Just talk about what is required to be a successful White House communications director, and whether, on the basis of your knowledge of Anthony Scaramucci, he is a good choice for the job.
In this White House, it's a totally different job. I mean, we used to sort of operate within the guardrails of rolling out a strategy for a president who was pushing an agenda for which he was trying to build support in Congress and among the public. And sometimes we came up very short. Yeah. And oftentimes the communications director manages communications for the president of the government after an outside event, after an attack like 9/11. But I don't know what this White House needs a communications director for, and it's no secret. Jared Kushner and sort of his wing, his faction inside the White House, has been very open about their displeasure with the current skill set of the existing comms folks. And so I'm not surprised that a new name that is not sort of a candidate of Reince and Bannon's choosing would emerge. But I think when you go to work for a president who became leader of the free world without someone that had said job, and there was no communications director, I don't know why you think you're going to get in the White House and be essential.
So my question for you is this, right? You know Mooch. Everyone at the table here knows Mooch. He's a well-known figure in New York, widely. People like him. He's a good guy. What do you think why does he want this job? Why would anybody want to be White House communications director? If you're a rich guy from New York, he's got some dough. Like, what's he thinking?
Because you're right there with the president of the United States. I mean, that's a big deal.
But what are you doing for this president? Like forwarding his tweets, retweeting him?
His problem, the country's problem, the world's problem is that the president is the communications director. He's his own communications director.
There's a bigger problem.
I mean, that bizarre. Mike Schmidt, Hall of Fame third baseman, still with us.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked you this yesterday, Michael. I mean, the idea, you, Maggie, Peter Baker from the Times, sitting in the Oval Office, if you read the entire transcript of the interview,
incredible.
It is beyond bizarre. I mean, what was your human reaction as you? Well, maybe you didn't get what he was saying as you sat there during it. I don't know. You tell us.
The president is harder to follow than I thought he would be. He tackles a lot of different things very quickly. And actually, as I was sitting here yesterday, there was a whole part where you guys sort of looked at some stuff that he had said about Napoleon, and I had forgotten about that entire part of the interview.
How could you forget that? That is my single favorite passage of the whole thing.
Because there was so many different things that went on in the interview. It was I guess we're in there for about 50 minutes, and he moves incredibly quickly. Because I think from Napoleon, we were quickly back on the economy and onto something else. And you have a very difficult time pinning him down and coming back to something. There's so many different interesting threads or things that you're not sure of, or where they came from or what they mean. So as myself, a first-time Trump interviewee, or interviewing him for the first time, it was an interesting experience in trying to follow him, but also trying to pin him down. We worked really hard on the Mueller issue and on the Russia investigation as the thing that we focused most of our efforts and energy on, but we could have sat there for a long time. My guess, and I don't know this, is that the president would have sat with us probably for another 2 hours if his aides had allowed him. He seemed to very much, once he got going, enjoy speaking with us and enjoy trying to allow us to see the world through his eyes.
Heidi, I want to ask you a question. I know Scaramucci, affable guy. Let me explain what Scaramucci does for a living. He ran a fund of funds. And when you run a fund of funds, you go in. What's a fund of funds? A fund of funds is somebody who basically raises takes hedge fund money and kind of distributes it. Basically, he's just going out and raising money. So he'll walk into a pension fund and go, invest $100 million with me. Hey, let's go out. I mean, he's basically a salesman, a tire salesman, okay? Which means he has no, I like him, but that's what he does. He has no skill set.
Not just a salesman, but a tire salesman.
Basically,
Okay.
it's no different. He basically has no skill set in communications, which is like Jared Kushner, who has no skill set in negotiating the Middle East. So he has a guy, he's a very bright guy, very affable guy, zero skills. And what seems, Heidi, to be consistent with this president, very often putting people in office who have actually no qualifications for the job.
Which is the great irony of this presidency, because if I take you back to the campaign trail, that was the promise of President Trump, was that while he may not have any experience whatsoever in government, in policy, or in the military, which is a first for our country as the chief executive, he would hire people around him who do. He would hire the best possible people. And what we're seeing here is that he's hiring people who are in his image instead of the people who have the deepest skill set. But in this case, like you said, I'm not sure how much it matters, because when you look back at the New York Times interview, it shows that there is no one who is running this train other than he himself. And in addition to making a lot of comments that just were off topic and didn't seem to make sense, and I wonder if you agree with this, Michael, he just kept talking on Russia and saying things that must have had his lawyers really, saying, please stop. Like, he brought up the dossier. And then he also seemed to, and I thought this was a really interesting point, to bring up the adoptions issue and confirm that he had discussed adoptions with Putin, which is essentially bringing up the Magnitsky Act and seemingly acknowledging that those officials who met with Don Jr. were in fact acting on the interests of Vladimir Putin in bringing up the Magnitsky Act. So each time he does one of these interviews, there's nobody, whether it's Anthony Scaramucci or the most experienced communications professional in Washington, capable of stopping him.
Yeah, my sense on the Russia stuff is that he looks at it, I mean, Trump is a person that's been involved in thousands of lawsuits, and he sort of looks at it in that lens, in the sense that it's like he can sort of put pressure on the other side, that he can make their life more difficult. He can throw a lot of resources at this issue, and eventually they'll sort of give in and make a deal and they'll move along. But that's not how federal investigations work, and especially a special counsel. But my sense from him is just sort of like, well, I'll fight this in the press, I'll push as hard as I can on it, and eventually we'll be able to make it go away, in the same way that lawsuits that he's dealt with before, how he's approached those. So the thing is, though, is that in the federal, it's just a bigger difference, and you've got someone in Mueller that's just a totally different animal from anything like that. And I think that's where they will run into issues, is running into that system.
He's hard to follow. Michael Schmidt, that will stay with me all day long.
Also, I like the fact that he can refer to thousands. The president's been involved in thousands of lawsuits, and you think, oh, he's well, no.
Well, you nod and you're like, yeah, of course he has.
Right.
Of course he is. All right, Michael Schmidt, thank you for spending some time with us. Your co-interviewer, one of them, Peter Baker, joins us at the top of the hour ahead.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.